Hello and welcome. I am your host of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Author Karen E. Osborne. I have five novels out. The latest is Justice for Emerson. I am so glad that you're here. This is a space for readers and writers to come together and talk about books. So, as I've mentioned to you before, you can't always read every book of every author that I interview because I do, an interview every week and sometimes every other week. But I got to read this book, and I am so excited for you to meet Elaine Mary Griffin. Hey, Elaine.
Thank you so much for having me
Oh, I'm
and for
delighted
reading
that
my
you're
book.
here. Yes, it was so good. I loved it. So, this is her latest book. She has other novels. Is it four novels that you have?
I think I only have three, and
Right.
only one is this is the only one to be published in any sort of time frame. Although I
Oh,
still have
okay.
hopes for the other ones.
I have hope for them too. Yes, because
Thank
this one
you.
is good. So I have hope for them. And it comes out in 2 days. So we're very excited that publication day is almost here. And it's kind of a coming of age story and a small town story. And also is historical, right? Historical fiction.
Yes.
So I noticed that horses seem to play a big, not only in this book, but when I was looking at the other books on your website, it looked like horses like a big deal in your life. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, horses are a big deal in my life, and especially in this book, they play a central role. Although this is the Shadows in the Pleasure Garden is the book where horses play the most central role. My other books, they're kind of just historical fictions. And so naturally horses show up and then, they're not really the center of attention though. But unfortunately, I don't have any kind of special connection with horses. And so I don't write about horse whispering or anything like that. But they do play a big part in my life. I've been an equestrian and a horseback rider for the past 2 decades, and I currently have three horses. And so I spend time with horses almost every day. And so they work their way into my books, especially this one.
Yeah, that is so cool. I have a dear friend who's an equestrian and she jumps and she's an author as well. I'm going to make sure she reads your book. I'm going to send it to her because she
Yeah.
she loves horses too. And she only owns one, but she but all her life she's just loved being on horses. So tell us a little bit about the time period and the setting and the premise.
Yes. So this is set in 1818. It's in Philadelphia, or on the outskirts of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And a lot of it, so it kind of starts out in the small town in the to the outskirts of Philadelphia. Chester Carter is an apprentice at a bank, but he witnesses this bank robbery, and the bank owner, Mr. Tate, seems to think that there's some money laundering going on at the racetrack at the Pleasure Gardens, which is basically just a big park that has a racetrack in it. And so Chester ends up visiting the Pleasure Gardens and watching horse racing and getting involved in the horse racing scene out there. And so the interesting part of this time period is that in 1817, there was a law passed in by the Pennsylvania General Assembly to outlaw horse racing in public streets in Philadelphia. And then in 1820, there was another law passed by the General Assembly to outlaw horse racing in general throughout the state, I believe. I believe throughout the state. And so it kind of, horse racing, it's always been kind of a contentious issue, and it still is. And so that kind of just played into the theme of this book, as where Chester was kind of dealing with growing up and deciding where he wants to take his life and what would be kind of respectable and responsible, and going through all of those choices with this broader political background. taking place in the background.
Yeah, yeah. So he's a very, well, let me ask you first, before we talk about your main character, who's a really, you're rooting for him the whole time. There's a story. One is rooting, the reader is rooting. But first, what inspired this story? Why this time period? Tell me what the thinking was there.
Mhm. So I was definitely inspired. My first year, after my first year of law school, I was working that summer as a law clerk for a very small firm, 4 days out of the week, and then 2 days of the week I would work at the horse racing track, it was just a job that I found on Indeed because I wanted to do something kind of fun and involved with horses at that time. I didn't have any horses with me, so I wanted to get more involved with horses again. And so it was kind of like I was part of these two worlds. I was, in one hand, working in the basement, just reading incredibly dull material all day and talking to no one. And it was kind of a sad job. And then on the other hand, I would go out to the racetrack and it was exciting. And I was outside all day and I got to see a bunch of horses. Um, and so just watching, I never had really any experience with horse racing before that summer. And so that definitely inspired me to write a book that that involves horse racing. And then the previous or the subsequent summer, the next summer, I worked for the circuit attorney's office in downtown St. Louis. And so I got to be involved in a lot of criminal trials. And so that inspired the burglary part of it and the courtroom scenes and just, the prosecutor. And that inspired just the law more portion of it. Um, and then the reason I guess I already kind of explained why I said it and set in 1818 because of those laws that were happening right around that time frame. And so that kind of the setting of it was definitely, yeah, it was after I already had the idea. And then I was just thinking, well, when should I put it? And the reason I do historical fiction is because I think it's easier to do than contemporary novels. I've never tried to write a contemporary novel, and it's because I'm afraid, because just all this crazy stuff happens nowadays, and I feel like you can kind of just push that aside when you're writing about the past. So that's why I decided to set it in 1818.
So interesting, Elaine, because I was always intimidated by historical fiction. I loved reading it. I would read historical fiction all the time, loved it. But I thought, oh my gosh, you have to do all that meticulous research. And that, and if you get one thing wrong and somebody sees like that couldn't have happened in that year, and next thing you know, people are writing you and telling you screwed it up. So that's funny because I did eventually write historical fiction, but I was scared all the time. So let's go there. I want to come back and talk about Chester, but before we talk about Chester, since we're talking about research, tell us like how you do your research. Are you one of those people who digs and digs and digs and digs and digs and then you start writing? Do you start writing and then you dig a little and write? Kind of what's your research writing process?
Yeah, I will say this book is poorly researched. It is mostly made up, and I really didn't have the fears about what if someone finds something that's not historically accurate in this book, because, I really was not anticipating too many people reading it and looking for that kind of thing. So it was never really something where I was thinking, oh, I better get this right and make sure I do my research. It was, as I mentioned before, the setting in the historical part of it definitely came after my idea about what to write about. And so I definitely did the research as it just kind of, as I was writing this, I would just look up certain things. What did they write with? What did they eat? Although I made most of that up too. Yeah, it was very much just as I go and have certain questions, I would look stuff up. And
Did
yeah,
you
that's
come
how I
across
did it.
anything really surprising or funny or interesting?
Um, yes, I mean, I did uncover those laws passed by the Pennsylvania General Assembly, which was pretty cool. I found the actual verbiage of them, which is always it's really fun for me to read that because the laws written in 1818 are they sound basically like they could be contemporary with the laws that are written
Hmm.
today, because we just use superfluous language and they're very wordy. Another thing though that I found really interesting as I was kind of researching, and so a lot of what my research entails is looking up, just doing like a Google image search of certain things. So I might do a Google image search of horse racing or pleasure gardens or something like that. And
Mhm.
so I found that the pose of when people were depicting horse racing in around that time era, and you can see on my book as well, which I have a handy copy
Wait,
of.
oh, hold it up again. Hold it up again.
It turned out much nicer than I thought. It's
It
so
looks
nice.
great. Looks
Thank you.
great.
But the horses are depicted in sort of this, you see their front legs are out and their back legs are out, and they're doing this bounding motion, which is
Mm.
not the way horses run if you watch horses gallop. But I suppose that's the thing. If you just watch horses gallop, you might not know because it's moving so quickly. And I suppose that's what happened in 1818. They were just, or in that time era, they were just depicting the way they thought horses must run, which is like kind of seems to me, if I look at this, it's kind of like the way deer run. They kind of bound. Um, and there was this ongoing debate about are forelegs of the horse off the ground when they're galloping? And the answer is yes, but not in the way that apparently people thought. Instead of the legs being spread out when they're off the ground completely, they are gathered under them. That's the time when all four legs are off the ground.
Ah,
So that's just kind of an interesting tidbit.
that is an
And
interesting tidbit. I like
yeah.
that. I have gone
Uh-huh.
to many horse races. We lived in upstate New York, and Saratoga is so we lived like 45 minutes from Saratoga. And so every August, which was the Saratoga horse racing season, we would go to a party that a friend hosted, and I would bet on horses based on criteria that nobody else would even think was criteria. Like I liked the name of the horse. But I've never, now that I think about them racing around, racing around the track, the next time we go, I'll have to look for that. I'll have to look at the way that the horses run. So tell us about the bet. I think the horses were a very interesting part of the book, but I liked Chester so much, and I really wanted him to succeed, and I wanted him to overcome. So tell us things that you like about him as a person and some of his troubling characteristics.
Well, thank you for saying that. I also really like Chester and I wanted him to succeed as well. Um, he is perhaps inspired by Charles Dickens's David Copperfield.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure I was reading him at some point when I was writing this book, and I think some of it might have rubbed off on Chester. But he's sort of an, I would say, unassuming character. He's kind of just going around trying to do his best, is really is what he's doing. And he feels a little bit out of place in professional society because his family comes from outside of town. They're farmers, and he's courting the daughter of a prominent member of society. And so he's really trying to make it in that world, but then he decides it's not really for him. And so he goes in a different direction, but he still tries to do right. And he keeps the thoughts of what his mother would think about things in his mind as he's, going through life and just making decisions and such. But, he's also a young man. And so I think maybe one of his struggles is that he makes a few rash decisions
Mhm.
throughout the story, and he isn't necessarily willing in the moment to kind of take a step back and maybe reconsider what he has decided or said or anything, and this is more likely to kind of double down in that position.
Yeah, he's young. He has,
Hmm.
he has a lot to learn still.
Yeah,
Don't we all, right?
yeah.
So, are you working on anything now? Are you in the process of writing something new or
I
rewriting
am.
something?
Yes, I am currently working on a book. It's the working title is The Little Pilot. It is about a boy who spends the summer with his grandpa and they refurbish this World War I era plane, and it's actually the 1950s. So at this point, the plane is quite old. In this book, there's not been a single horse appearance so far. I think I will have to change that, but so far, no horses. And it's heavily involves flying small planes, which is not something I do, and really not something I'm particularly interested in doing ever. So this one has been pretty challenging to write, and I'm hoping I can get through it because I kind of like it. We'll see.
Cool. Yeah, you'd have to figure out a way to put a horse in there just for the
Yes.
thread, you know?
Uh-huh.
You're yeah, that sounds like a good plan. So as you think about it, like you go back in your past and you think about books that have had a big impact on you, or an author that's had a big impact on you, and kind of the way you approach writing or what you write. Can you share some author that had an impact on you?
Yes, I think Jane Austen is one of my all-time favorites. I love, yeah, I love her approach to kind of humorous stories that don't necessarily have to have these big, overwhelming plots and a lot of action. And even though they are humorous and they do involve the just the many faults of people, they still have respect for all of the characters, and they're still writing about characters that at the end of the day you're rooting for and you want them to succeed even though they have their faults. I also really like Charles Dickens, especially David Copperfield, but all of his books are pretty darn good. And when I was younger, I was a big fan. I mean, I'm still a big fan, but when I was younger, I read through all of the Harry Potter books many, many times. So that had a big influence on just my love of reading and character development and world building. Those were great.
Yeah, world building. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's what we all have to do as writers. It doesn't have to be just fantasy writers. You had to build a world, for Chester that we could all see and feel like we know. Yeah. So that's such an important part of it. Is there a book that you've read recently that you can recommend to our audience? Because this is what are you reading? What are you writing? So we like to recommend books.
Yes. So lately I've been working through Wikipedia's list of the top contenders for the Great American Novel, and it's a list that goes
Mm,
chronologically through American history. It actually starts pre-American history. The first book is The Last of the Mohicans. But the book that I
mm.
would recommend from that so far, I'm not done with it, but from that list so far, I would say is Moby Dick. It's a very long book,
I was
and
gonna
there's
say, oh my goodness, Elaine,
yeah.
that, that was it's a tough one for me. But okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
And I completely agree. It was a tough one for me too. If I were to reread it, I would just skip out all of the, encyclopedic minutia about whaling and just, read the more of the plot. And if I were the editor, I think I would make it into a more enjoyable book. But yeah, I think it has a lot of interesting potential there. I think the underlying story, if you can get like throw away all the characters that or all the chapters that do not add anything to the plot, because I think there are probably more than half of that book does not add to the plot. But I think if you get past that and I think there's a really interesting and fun story underneath.
Yeah. You remind me of my son. My son is an author and a writer, and he loves literature. He loves, he's a literary writer, like unlike me, who's a genre writer. And uh and he sticks through books. He if he starts a book, he feels a commitment to that author, even if he's struggling. And he just feels like, you owe it to the author to finish the book. So I think the two of you would like each other.
Well, I mean, I'm
I
sure.
wasn't not in a fix-up way, not in a fix-up way. He's happily married, but I just meant that you'd find a kindred spirit.
Well, that is funny. I have abandoned many a book, and so I'm not at all above not finishing books if
You
I
don't, yeah. So Moby Dick, you just liked enough to keep going.
yeah, and I skimmed many parts of it. I'm not going to say I read every word, but
Oh, okay. Then you're more like me. Then you're more like me than him. So this has just been a delightful conversation. And once again, I highly recommend to you guys that you read Elaine's book. And let's just remind them, Shadows in the Pleasure Gardens. Can you show them the there you go. And it comes out in 2 days, and you can pre-order it right now if you would like to do that. But how can people find you? Where would be the best? So, you can buy the book every place that you would normally buy books, in independent bookstores and Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places. You can go to the library, although we'd love it if you would buy a book, but libraries are good too. We love libraries. But where can they find, besides those places, where else can they find you and be in touch with you?
I have a website, elainemarygriffin.com. I also have an Instagram, which is elainemarygriffin_author. And then just I want to point out that my book is Shadows in the Pleasure Gardens, subtitle regarding robberies and racehorses. So I think you may have better luck finding it if you type in the whole thing, and then you can type
Yeah,
in
so
Elaine
say it
Mary
again.
Griffin.
Say the subtitle again.
Regarding robberies and racehorses is the
Isn't that
subtitle.
cool? Regarding robberies and resources. Yes, I think you're right. That'll draw more people. I'm sorry that I left that part out. That's what it's about. It's about robberies and resources, which is very good. I hope you all have enjoyed meeting Elaine as much as I have had. It's so cool when you read somebody's book and then meet them. I always love meeting authors. I hope that you will go on her website and that you will contact her. And when you do, you know what you're supposed to do. Tell her that you met her on What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Thanks, everybody, and I will see you next week. Bye bye.